men, welcome to the most important podcast that you'll hear in a long time. It's the Men's Leadership Community Podcast, and it starts now.
It's a great honor for me to have my brother, Stephen Fortenberry, who is a childhood friend of mine that I've known for over 30 years. That is more than half of my life. And Steve has an amazing testimony. And so I kind of wanted to show you a couple of pictures. And for those of you that are listening online, it's just a picture of us when we were in our teens, all of us together, me and my brother, and then him and his brother. We played together in a band during college years, and here we are. We had quite a few famous Christian bands close for us: the Normals, All Star United, Sky Park, to name a few. I mean, it's a pretty big deal, guys. We got to play right around noon. So he shared with us a little bit yesterday about his vision statement and about his mission statement, but we didn't quite get to his value statement because I wanted to hear a little bit more about his testimony because it is so good. But Steve, welcome. We're glad to have you again, my brother.
Amen.
Could you please share with us your value statement and then your verse here in a second, and then we'll kind of get started. And man, we're going to go on a journey this morning.
Yes, my value statement is simply to be involved in my church. You know, there is only one church, by the way. That's what the Bible says. Reach out to the community and city that I live in, to go into the prisons and to give my time and any gifts and talents I have being given to help other men and women connect to God through music or through my testimony or by teaching the truths that are in the Bible. In short, to love out loud.
And I know that you mentioned to go into the prison ministry, which is something that you're very passionate about. And we're going to really expand on that here in a minute. But I just wanted to kind of point that out and get some context into that and highlight that because it's going to be relevant to what you're going to talk about here, especially if there are people that joined us this week that were not here last week. So why don't you share your life verse with us?
Yes, it's Psalm 73, 21 through 24. And I prefer to read out of the Christian Standard Bible. I don't read a lot out of that Bible, but there's some really good interpretations of the verses that I like. And this one has the word stupid in it. So I really like this version. It says, when I became embittered and my innermost being was wounded, I was stupid. I could relate to that and didn't understand. I was an unthinking animal towards you. I think that kind of helps a lot of us relate. It's how we was at one point towards God, like an unthinking animal. I am always with you. You hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me up in glory.
That is a beautiful version of that verse, and I think a lot of us can relate to that. And if you guys remember, last week we talked about really those moments when you're up at the top of the mountain and then something happens, whether it is from our own doing or from an external circumstance outside of our control that kind of shoots us down this downhill spiral. And we talked about Job last week, and we also talked about King David, which were two separate people with two different stories that both got hurled down a weird path towards what we're going to talk about, the dark valley. So they eventually end up hitting this rock bottom, and I want to kind of go over a little bit about somebody that kind of hit rock bottom. And as we were thinking about this, me and Andy this week, we couldn't think of anybody else better than Jonah. Because if you don't know the story, you've all heard, the story of, this guy that God calls and tells him to go preach to Nineveh and tell them that, hey, it's going to go bad for you guys. I need you to go and tell them that. And Jonah says, I'm going to do the total opposite. I'm going to go the other way. So he gets on a ship, goes away, and then the ship gets battered. He ends up getting thrown off of the ship, and a whale or a big fish swallows him. And while he's down there in in the in the fish's insides, intestines, or stomachs, whatever it is that's gross down there, you you kind of get to this situation where we are. And I'm going to read it to you, and we're going to talk a little bit about it and have Steve kind of share his kind of story on how it relates to that. So Jonah, this is found in the book of Jonah. It's a small book in the Old Testament. Okay. If you don't know how to look at it, go to the beginning of your Bible and it's got a list of the books, and you can find it from there and then make your way there. It says, from the inside, the great fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God, saying, in my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. To those who cling to worthless idols, turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. The Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah on dry land. Very relatable to all of us. And because we've all found ourselves in that moment where, by our own choices, we have ended up hitting rock bottom. There is always collateral damage when it comes to sin. Sometimes we have the luxury of it affecting only us, but you will find that as you begin to get older, as you begin to have families, the luxury of sinning and it affecting only us is not something that we longer have. There is always collateral damage. There's always a deep penalty for sin. And so, Steve, I want you, we talked about last week about, what kind of began your downward spiral. And it began with, when you talked about hanging out with the wrong people and making some choices that eventually led to your rock bottom. And man, you left off at the credit card thing, and so guide us to and tell us a little bit about kind of what happened that began that and how you hit rock bottom and what that looked like for you.
Man, sure, Obie. I've got to say one thing. You brought up Jonah, and that's my favorite book in the Bible. You know, because I can relate to this so much. I've taught through this book several times when I was in prison, and I've read every commentary on it and really studied it because I know I can. I know a lot of men can relate to this book, but I know for me especially because God called him, right? And he went away from the presence of the Lord. He went in the opposite direction of where God called him. And that's exactly what I did. I knew there's not a lot of times that you know for sure what God wants you to do. Right now, I'm not 100% certain. I know what I'm supposed to do today. I know basically the direction I'm going, but he hasn't given me a clear message yet, precisely narrowed it down what my future is going to be. We got to wait on the Lord sometime. And that's what I'm doing right now. And just trust he's opening a lot of doors, not me. He's doing that. And so I'm just following him. But you're right. I've got Jonah 2:2 tattooed on my arm. I made some dumb decisions and I got some tattoos that I'm not proud of, but that's one that I am kind of proud of because it's the New Living Translation, but it's Jonah 2:2. It says, I called to you from the land of the dead. and Lord, you heard me. And I felt like I was there in the land of the dead. I've heard a sermon when I was in prison. This preacher came and said, Jonah died and went to hell, and he prayed to God from hell. That's a fact, Jack. That's what the preacher said in the church. And I was like, oh my gosh, Jonah went to hell. So that, got me thinking, like, this is a prophet of God, and he disobeyed, and he obviously went to hell. So I had to really study, and I realized this preacher was very confused and misunderstood the Bible, because the very first verse before he started his prayer says, then Jonah prayed to the Lord, his God, from the fish's belly, not from hell. If you pray from your spirit, if he died and his spirit went to hell, he would be praying from hell. But it said he prayed from the fish's belly, and he said he prayed to his God, not the God or a God, his God. And that's what is important. Psalms 23 says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's not enough that he is the shepherd or a shepherd, but he's my shepherd. He leads me, and that's the difference. That's how you know you belong to him. And I know Jonah did. He went in the opposite direction. He didn't obey, but he still belonged to God, and that's important. But it's also important to know what you said at the very first. When he did go away from the presence of the Lord, he went to the ship, and it says he paid the fare. And man, I paid the fare. That's what God is trying to keep us from. He's not trying to control us. He's trying to keep us from paying the fare. And we think we're going to do this sin. We're going to do this thing that's really going to satisfy us. And we're trying to satisfy ourselves instead of trusting God to satisfy us. And we always end up paying the fare. And I paid a heavy fare. But when I realized God tried everything to keep me from that, he sent men to me. He sent you to me, Obie. And that's one thing I wanted to bring up is when I had got out, okay, the first time I did that year, I got out and I got involved in the wrong stuff right away when I got out. And God spoke to me. I think I told y'all about that. People came to my restaurant, prophesied over me. And I ended up leaving the situation I was in and moving in with Pastor Casson and his family, which is crazy that he allowed me to do that. I was a young man, 22, and I moved in with his family. He couldn't even afford it. I found out later, but he was doing that in faith and trying to help me and mentor me. And I did pretty good for a little while. And then the first real tribulation trial I hit, a girlfriend broke up with me. And that did it. That was enough to get me off. So we can do good under our own strength for a little bit until something happens. And I fell all the way off, got way off track, got real hurt. There were some things that happened, and it's a really long story, but I got hurt. And, men are people, pastors are going to let us down. Sometimes we're all human, but our joy comes from God. Our strength comes from God. We're following God, and men are going to let us down. So when somebody offends you or hurts you in a church, don't stop going to church. People say, well, there's a bunch of hypocrites in church. Well, if you go, there'll be one more. There's going to be problems. There's problems in churches, and there's problems, especially in prisons. But I got involved because how are you going to make a difference if there is a problem, and there are in churches? Then hey, you can do the most change, the most good from inside, being involved. You can't change something from the outside. So get involved in the fight and try to help and change things. And so I left. and I got right back immediately into drugs, and it was a slippery slope. After that, I ended up moving back to Brownwood, not to my parents' house where I should have went, but moving back to Brownwood, and I got involved, and I was really deep at that point in selling drugs and the whole lifestyle. And I moved back in July of 2006, July the 4th, I think it was. My dad came and got me, and I moved in with a friend at his house by the Coliseum in Brownwood. And that was July the 4th. By December the 21st, I had got arrested and got a 15-year sentence for possession. And short amount of time, and got these. It was really trumped up. They said I was like some kind of kingpin or something. I was really just a punk, but they had me in the front page of the paper, after seeking and searching for Mr. Fortenberry as part of a drug methamphetamine ring. They wasn't seeking and searching for me. Some guy called in and told them what car I was in, snitched on me, and so they were waiting on me. And but I want to say one thing about that. I want to skim over it because God always tries to stop us. When you belong to Him, like the Israelites, He always warned them. And I found that to be true. My pastor, who I ended up leaving, and he kind of hurt me, and I kind of hurt him at that time. And so I left. But when I went to court, I wasn't facing 15 years. I was facing 15 months. And that was just too much for me at the time. 15 months? So I went to court one day, and I was high when I went to court. And I showed up late, and I thought I'm going to get postponed or whatever. And my attorney informs me that we're having trial right now. And, he thought he could get it postponed. It's not happening. Are you ready? We're going in there. We're going to trial. And they got witnesses. Some cop from Dallas was there. I don't know what he was going to say, but I was scared. And I was like, man, I can't go to jail today. I can't. So somehow he talked the judge into giving me a month because I turned myself in before. And so the judge gave me, but I had to sign a plea of guilty, and then I am going to prison for 15 months. But he gave me a month to get my affairs in order. So I left that courthouse knowing I got to turn myself in on December 21st. And so what did I do? I called my pastor, right? And I was crying. I'd already gotten high. I went and got high and then called my pastor. I'm just being honest. And I was crying. I said, man, I've got to do about a year, man. I'm going to prison. And he said, Stephen, I've been having dreams about you. Me and my wife have been praying for you. And let me tell you, you're going to prison, but it's not going to be that bad. And it's going to be okay. And when you get out, things are going to be fine. But you need to go home. This month you got. Go home to your dad's house. He was pastoring a church at the time. Help him. Make the flyers for the church, mow the yard, serve your father for this month. And it ain't going to be that bad, but you got to go home. If you don't, it'll be twice as bad. He's like, God's been telling me this. Please listen to me. And I said, yeah, okay, of course. I'm going to go home. He's like, promise me. I said, I'm going to go home. Promise you. And I did not go home. And I thought, having dreams about me, these people are trying to control me. I'm grown. I can do what I want to do. And I sure did. I did exactly what I wanted to do. And here's the thing. I was supposed to turn myself in at 9 a.m. on December 21st. I got pulled over at 2 a.m., 7 hours before I was supposed to turn myself in. And there was a detective and 2 cops waiting on me. And I told the detective, man, you got me in 7 hours. What are y'all doing? He's like, I'm just doing my job, Mr. Fortenberry. And they arrested me on a possession charge. So I went to county and sit in the holding cell for 7 hours. They took me into court at 9, and the judge started my state jail time for 15 months. And I go back and I wait in county for a few months and then end up getting 15 years. And for that, about a half ounce of meth is what I had. And I'm sitting in prison, and I thought about what Pastor told me. I thought about it, and I didn't think, yes, I beat myself up, but it was more than that. It was recognizing that God still loved me enough to try to warn me, to try to stop me, to try to keep me from doing what I was doing to myself. And that meant a lot to me. And I ended up doing 3 years and 2 months on that 15-year sentence in prison. At that time, I got out in 2010, February the 4th, 2010. That's almost exactly double 15 months. Almost exactly, but a little bit more. And that's what he told me. It'll be twice as bad if you don't. And I knew then that was God talking to me.
Now, let me ask you something, okay? At any point when you begin straying and really rebelling from God, when what God had called you to do, right? Because He had given you talents, He had really put you in a place that nurtured you, right?
Yeah.
With your parents that loved you. At any point when you begin that strayward path, did you ever think that the consequences of that would lead you to where you were at that moment when you served those 3 years in prison?
No, me go to prison? What? Well, I'm Stephen Fortenberry. What are you talking about? Man, my dad's a preacher, and I'm not that bad. You know, I'm a pretty good guy, and that's no it. But let me tell you, that's what happens. Sin. It says I come the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and that's what he does. And but it says Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and have it to the fullest. So I want to say this. I got out, and before I got out, I was about to get out 2 days away from getting out. And I already made parole. I'm in this little 6-month program similar to the one I went to before, but I was in prison this time. And 2 days, I'm scared to death. I was 26. I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, you're starting over and you get scared because you're like, man, whatever, like you have every option available. That's one good thing about getting out of prison and starting over is you can go any direction. Once you start living and start making choices and decisions, it narrows your options, right? That's why I'm really careful right now about making decisions on which direction, and especially in ministry, I'm going because it's going to narrow my options. Every decision you make, and after a while, you got a life, but you're kind of zeroed in. I've got to go this route. But when you get out, you can go any direction you want. But that's also scary. And so I sit up in my bed on a Saturday night, 2 days before I'm getting out. Everybody's asleep, and I'm just talking to God. I'm really just like, Lord, I'm not good at hearing your voice. I need you to slap me and tell me like where I'm supposed to go to church. What if I go to the wrong church? What church am I supposed to go to? What job am I supposed to have? What friends am I supposed to have? Like, I need to know. I don't know which direction to go. And what if I pick the wrong way? I need you to please help me. And the next morning in church, I'm really just I'm thinking about home. I'm just going through, I play the guitar and I sit down the front row. There's this Pentecostal lady preaching and she's spitting and yelling and I ain't even listening to her. And she's all the way up the aisle. I'm on the front row. I'm just thinking about, man, I'm finna get some real eggs in about 2 days. We're finna eat some bacon and eggs and ice cream. And I'm thinking about home, you know, and she stopped preaching. up the aisle. I'm on the front. And when she stopped preaching, I felt something. Like I felt the presence of God. Like it was crazy. And literally, I said, whoa. And I started crying just to myself. I like bawling, just tears started coming out of my eyes. I was like, what's going on? And she came up around. She stopped, came all the way up around and stood right in front of me. And she felt it. And she said, whoa. And she stepped back. And she said, you're about to go home. She said, you're worried about where you're going to church. What friends are you going to have? What job are you going to get? The exact things I just prayed about the night before by myself. She's like, you're so worried about these things and what you're going to do. But God says it will be laid out right in front of your eyes what you're supposed to do and where you're supposed to go. All you got to do is be disciplined. Be disciplined and follow God, and He will lay it out in front of you. And I knew then that, in fact, there was a God, not because of what I read, not because of what somebody told me, but because He just spoke to me. And I started bawling because I thought, who am I? I'm a worm. But God still finds me important enough to speak to.
And I just want to point out that this is while you were in prison, that even while you are in prison, paying the price for breaking the law, for, the consequences of your own doing, of your own rebellion, that God is still speaking to you, that God is still working. And I just want to point that out to those that are listening right now, especially in those times when we we screw up, or in the times when we're going through those times, those dark seasons of the night, right? That we feel alone, and that we feel God is actively, even in those situations, working for our good and shaping us. And I would say He was molding you and removing parts of you that would hinder you from knowing His heart in a deeper manner, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is and we're still not even through. I mean, we're still not even through your rock bottom.
We're not there. So I did not. I got out of prison, and it was exactly like she said. It was literally laid out in front of me. I didn't have to go apply for jobs. It's crazy. I was working with my brother for a minute. I was not doing really well at selling roofs. It was the worst year on record for roof sales. There was no storms anywhere, and and I was desperate. So people can smell desperation when you're trying to sell something. And I sucked. I sold like 2 roofs. I think we lost money on both of them. I gave away a bunch of free gutters. I misunderstood the coupon, and so it wasn't for me. And I had too much free time. But God, I ended up serving in this church, playing the guitar for this church that just started. And I met this man and I asked him, "Hey man, I need a consistent job." And the guy ended up calling me about a month later. He owned a plumbing company, and Christian man. And I got to learn. I worked for him for almost 3 years, learned the trade of plumbing. And a great guy, great guy. Love that guy. He fired me twice. Love him to death. I was anyway. That's another story. But he's somebody that God put in my life, and I was in Celebrate Recovery for 3 years. I was sober, right? Altogether, 3 years in prison, 3 years out. I had 6 years and 7 days clean from meth. But I was clean from meth, right? But I was drinking every once in a while, and that's okay. I'm not saying drinking's a sin. You're gonna, all this stuff, which I believe it is. But hey, whatever, you know. For me, drinking is a sin, right? Because of my addiction problems, right? I know I can't, and it's just not for me. At the time, I didn't believe that. I still really didn't want to believe I had an addiction, and so I did some good things in the time I was out, and started a convict Bible study at my brother's house, and was involved in some good stuff. But I still knew if I had the opportunity, where nobody might know about it, what I'm going to do. And I was still looking at pornography. I was still sleeping with women, and I was lying about it and hiding all this stuff. Still doing the same things. I just wasn't getting high, but I was still living the same type of lifestyle. I remember my laptop would get screwed up, and I would call. I had this friend that was really good with computers named Obie, right? And so I'd call Obie, and I'm like, man, my laptop froze up. It's playing music, and I can't get it to stop. And he's like, "What's your IP address?" And I tell him, and my mouse would start moving, and I'm, hours away from him. I'm like, how you doing that? Like, all right, he would fix it, and he'd like, quit watching porn, Stephen. I'm like, what? How do you know that? So there wasn't a real change, right? I didn't really surrender to
Would you
God.
call that behavioral modification?
Behavioral modification. I was really just trying to get people off my back, and I did want to do right. I did want to. I had my spirit was waging war with my flesh, right? But I hadn't surrendered to God. I hadn't given up control of my life, not really. And so I remember in 2012, somewhere around the fall, somewhere around there, you called me, Obie, actually, one day, and I was in my garage. I still remember I was in my brother's garage, and you told me that you had been having dreams.
No, it was Kim. Kim told me Kim was the one that had the same
Said my
dreams.
wife has been dreaming about you, and I have something to tell you. And he's like, I'm not a super spiritual. I don't think I'm better than you, and I do know you. I know that that's not you. And so, and you said, but Stephen, I have to tell you this warning from God. I have to. And I said, okay, Obie, what is it? And he said, if you don't stop messing with these women, you're going back to prison. And I was like, okay, all right, sure thing. But I hung up the phone and I said, it's not illegal. Where am I going to go to? I can't go to prison for it's not. I'm not. Anyway, nothing I was doing was illegal in that sense. So like, that don't make sense to me. He's tripping. I relapsed December 27th, 2016. Had 6 years and 7 days. December 28th. I got arrested on 21st, 2006. I had 6 years and 7 days. Clean, threw it away. And it was one of the guys that was coming to my convict Bible study that I relapsed with. And I knew he was playing around and I shouldn't have went over there. But so December 28th, by October, I was back in prison, right? Took 10 months. I was off and on, but still in my mind, I was like, when I went to prison, I was like, man, I did all this good for all these years, and all anybody remembers is this 10 months. But I had all these years, I was doing all this good stuff, right? And doing positive things. And so I really didn't learn a lesson. I really got bitter. So a girlfriend I had, some friends that I had when I went to prison that time, really did. I got done wrong in a lot of ways. Some of my stuff went through and taken by some of my friends, and I just got bitter. So I knew when I got out of prison this time, I got a 10-year sentence that time for possession. Went back under my old number because I had more time left on my old sentence than this new sentence I got. And I did 35 months, a little bit under 3 years this time, 35 months. Then I got out, and about September of 2016, and I knew I was getting high while I was still in the halfway house. I didn't try. I was like, man, I've done all this time in prison, and I've never really experienced this drug that I went to prison for all these times. I haven't even really got to experience it all the way. I had never used a needle, and I don't like sharing this. Right? I don't. It's very shameful, but it's important to know that it'll always take you further than you ever thought you would go. That's what sin will do. And I started using a needle this last time I was out, and I was only out of prison 6 months. 6 months, and I did some terrible things. Right? It. Oh man, when I went to prison again, I think I went to church twice in 6 months. I think that was about it. And I had gotten a good job and stuff, and I was doing well. I had a truck and all these things, but man, I threw it all away. And when I was headed back to Fort Worth from Brownwood one day, I had rolled my truck. This is the time I told y'all last time about Don Twyford speaking to me and warning me. Again, I got every time before I went to prison, God warned me. And God sent Don to warn me this last time. And I didn't listen to him. Although I can't say I didn't listen to him, it stopped me in my tracks. And I waged war. I battled it the whole night. But I still wanted control. And I said, well, on Monday, I'm going to stop. And I don't really think I would have stopped on Monday, to be honest with y'all. But that was my plan. We always make plans, you know, and that was my plan. But when I fell asleep and rolled my truck 3 times, it rolled over 3 times off the highway, going 60, 70 miles an hour, I should have died. I literally woke up driving alongside the highway on I-20, going 65, 70 miles an hour. Think about that. Your truck's bouncing, dust is going everywhere, and if I would have hit a sign, a culvert, I would have been dead. And I jumped back on the highway, lost control. My truck spun all the way around and went off the highway sideways. And when my tires went off, I thought, well, that's it. That's it. I'm dead. And it started rolling. And when it came to a stop, it was on its side. And when I crawled out, I didn't have a scratch. I didn't have one scratch. And I knew that was God sparing my life yet again. But when I went to prison, this time I got 25 years. 25 years for about $100 worth of drugs. They said it was a lot more. They said it was a whole bunch, but they were lying. But that's okay. I got 25 years mainly because of my history, and so I know I've got to do. You know, I still line up. I'll probably do 3, 4 years. You know, but I was sitting in county, right? My mama had been waiting on me to come home, and I went and seen her twice. All the time she would drive to go visit me, her and my dad. I'm in prison. They're driving hours to go visit me, stopping what they're doing in their life and going to visit their son in prison. And I'm out and got a truck, and I didn't go see them because I'm so caught up in what I'm doing. I can't stop doing what I'm doing. I'm trying to satisfy myself. And I don't want to disrespect them at the same time and go home when I'm high, but not getting high is not an option. And that's how crazy you drugs, because it is like a sorcery. It that's what meth is. It'll change your whole priorities, everything that is valuable, your values, what's important to you. It changes it, and I think it's a drug of Satan. And so I'm sitting in county, and I broke my mama's heart. It wasn't just me that I hurt, right? I hurt my entire family, and I hurt some friendships. And I was sitting in jail, and I was praying, God, help me get out of this when I go to court. Please help me find a way, a loophole in the legal system so I can get illegal search and seizure or something. That's what we do when we're in county fighting it. And I literally heard God say, "Why? What did you do when I let you out last time?" And it broke me down because I said, "Man, you're right. I went to church twice. I didn't tell anybody about what you've done for me when I was in prison and how much you blessed me and have always been there for me. I didn't tell a soul. So what are you going to do when you get out? I get you out. Okay, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Lord," I started crying, bawling. I said, if you can use me in here, then so be it. I'll stay here. I just want to be used by you. I just want to have purpose again. I don't have any purpose in my life. I felt so empty. I hurt everybody that loved me. I was literally destroying my life, and I had nothing left. I said, wherever you can use me the most, so be it. As long as you are in my life, David said, restore to me the joy of your salvation. And that's what I wanted. I didn't have any joy. Was I still saved? Probably. I believe I was. I could be wrong. But I didn't have any joy. And it says the joy of the Lord is our strength, right? So I didn't have any strength. And from that moment, things started changing. I got a little Bible and I got to Romans 5, and it says, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God. And it's not like a peace, man, like the hippies. No, we're at war with him in our minds. And when we're justified by faith, it's by grace that we are saved through faith. We have peace with him. Now we can come boldly before the throne where there is grace. And having read Romans 5, where it says, sin entered the world through one man, Adam. By that, we're all guilty. Man, that's not really fair. And then it says, but so this one righteous act by the second Adam, Jesus, we're all judged righteous. And that's not fair either. But that helped me finally click in my mind that it's not on me. I can't do anything. It's on him. And he's done everything. And so I was telling Stephen earlier when we first got on here, Philippians 2:13. Everybody says the other verse before it says, work out your own salvation. People say, you really got to work for it, and it says work out your own salvation. But the next verse says, for it is God who gives you the will and the strength to do his will. So God gives us the desires, and he also gives us the ability to do it. Because I was like, man, when that sunk in, that really helped me, because I did not have the ability to do it. I don't have it. And I want to do the right thing. I didn't have the strength.
And I think that's what's important. I think if more than anything, I want each person that's here, and those that are going to be listening to really understand that, even through all of this, Christ is actively working for your good. You're not alone. You are not alone. He was with you, and as dark as it is, and I think this is so unpopular, especially in 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 today's world, because I believe that the prosperity gospel has kind of started creeping its way into a lot of churches, where you follow Christ, and you kind of have this unspoken expectation that maybe everything's going to go well for you, right? That you're going to, I mean, you're going to get married, and go to a nice church and have a white picket fence. You're going to struggle a little bit with this, or maybe you curse at somebody, drop an F-bomb on somebody that tailgating you or something, and then that's pretty much going to be and we don't like to talk about the fact that sometimes God is going to use those situations that sometimes are almost unspeakable to shape us and to remove parts of us that would allow us to know his heart deeper. That means
Yeah.
heartache. That means lots of tears. That means sometimes disease, poverty, even prison time. But
Yeah.
even in those moments, I believe that he's there in the muck with us. And I hope that it is encouragement to those of y'all that are listening to us. You may be going through that right now. You may be at that point where you're kind of like my brother Stephen here, that he's just in prison. You know, I don't know how I would react if somebody told me that 25 years, that's a long time. That
I
is
did
a
7. I did 7 of that 25 this time. But let me tell you, it's 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 the university of the wilderness is what they call it. But everybody everybody's wilderness is different, right? And you don't have to go to prison. You don't have to go through the depths, right? And your rock bottom is wherever you stop it. Wherever you stop, and it is where the prodigal son come to his senses. Wherever you come to your senses at, that'll touch your rock bottom. So when I made those choices at first, and it really started sinking in and counting. But when I got to prison, I got to the Gurney unit, I got in the faith-based dorm around this chaplain, I really, truly surrendered. And I made a decision. It's important. Love is a decision. It says those that love God are known by him. That kind of helps explain Matthew 7, where it says, depart from me. I never knew you. So 1 Corinthians 8:13 says those that love God are known by him. So it says in Romans 5 that he demonstrated his love towards us, that while we were yet sinners, he died for us. So we say we love God, but we got to demonstrate it, right? So I said, one thing I had never done was give 100%. Never. I might give 80, and I was involved in stuff, but I always held on to 10%. I knew if I had the opportunity, right, I always held on in my mind. And many men do this, I believe. They hold on to this, and I'm going to give God all this part of my life, but this part I'm going to keep hidden, but I had never given 100%. So I can't say it's not for me if I've never really given. So I made a decision in prison in 2020 to give 100%. And I said, you know what? They're not going to stop making drugs. They're going to keep printing money, right? I can always go back to it. You can always go back if that's what you want to do. But I got to give it a real try, 100%. And when I made that decision, I said, well, I can't do that forever. That's just where I was at. I said, but for 1 year, I've lost all these years. I've invested all these years in prisons. And 1 year, I'm going to give 100%. And at the end of that year, I can evaluate and say, well, where am I at now with God, and how do I feel? And I want to just go back. But remember, I made a decision before, if you're hot or cold, and I chose to be cold, right? And that was the worst decision I ever made. But this was the best decision I ever made when I decided to give 100%. Man, I haven't looked back because his word is full of promises. And you can trust in his promises. That's one thing and one person. And he's not really a man, but he is a man. Jesus is a man, but he's also God, and God will not lie. So it's impossible for God to lie. So these promises that are in his word, you can trust. Not that you're going to be super rich, but you are going to be super rich spiritually. And that's the area that counts, because that's how we go through problems. And I've been out for over a year. I'm still single as they come, and a little lonely sometimes. But we can still go through these situations. And I was gone for 7 years, so it's been over 8 years. Amen. So normally that would have me down. I went through a breakup since I've been out. Man, normally that would have knocked me in the dirt, because that was somebody that the first girl I was ever with, God put back in my life, and we broke up, and that hurt me. But normally that would have knocked me off track. But the strength that we get to go through these problems is knowing that, man, this is not my home. I'm just passing through. We have a future and a hope in heaven. And that's why it says, I have overcome the world. You are still in the world. You will have tribulations, but take heart. I've overcome the world. And there's a good illustration. When I made parole, I had 4. When you go to prison, you have a 25-year sentence. You're eligible for parole in about 3 years. Okay, that's just how, if it's a non-violent drug offense or something like that. So I've seen parole in about 3 years. And I went to the parole board, they did evaluation, denied. 1 year, come back in a year. A 1 year set off, what they call it. I got 4 of those, right? So that's, you get like hope every time you go, I'm going home. And then, no, you're not. Come back in a year. And so I had quit worrying about it, right? I was just, I was all in where I was at, and God did so much. I could literally talk to y'all for a month on what God did in prison. I got to lead 10 men in my own dorm to Christ. Never led anybody to Christ before in my life. And I got to lead 10 men that I lived with in my dorm. I got to have Bible studies in my dorm. God did some amazing things. Led worship in probably 1,000 services. Just at Gurney, I led worship at 400 and some services. And I didn't put myself in those positions. I never lobbied for any position. But God always told people to use me in whatever aspect because I'd given him 100%. And God could trust me. Trust is earned, right? And so it's a beautiful thing, but man,
I'm just perplexed. Yeah.
I was going somewhere with that.
Well, I know. I think I know where you were, but I just love your honesty, really, and I think it's so important. You mentioned something about not being fully known, which is something that we practice here and we promote here at the MLC. That's part of our core values that we are open, honest, and vulnerable. And that is so important, really, especially when you're trying to go solo, right? And the fact that once you were honest with God about you, it's God knows. It's not like he doesn't know until you tell him, right? But that acknowledgement that says, all right, I have been given 80%, and it's that 20% that God's really interested in, because once that happens, that's when he really, really begins working. And I want to share as we close out, I want to share kind of a couple of things with you guys when it comes to our rock bottom. It's the great equalizer, like you said earlier, Stephen. That rock bottom, because of Adam, we've all hit rock bottom. We start at rock bottom. It is the great equalizer. And but you're not alone. Christ is for us, even in the midst of all of that. He is
That's
for
right.
you. Right? And he will use your rock bottom story for his glory, as we can see here. It's with Stephen, you know. And then more than anything, that rock bottom is not a permanent place with Christ. That is the big difference. With Christ at the center, your rock bottom is a story, all of a sudden, a story of hope, and even something that God can use for his glory to mold you, to shape you, to kind of like a surgeon, to scourge away with like a, with the, I forget what those things are called, a scalpel. Those
Yeah.
cancers is part of you that would prevent you from knowing him and experiencing life at the fullest. And I'm going to close out with this quote by Oswald Chambers that says, when God gets us alone through suffering, heartbreak, temptation, disappointment, sickness, or by thwarted friendship, when he gets us absolutely alone and we are totally speechless, unable to ask even one question, then he begins to teach us.
Amen.
So
Yeah.
we're gonna pray, and then we're gonna stay for the after party. I would love it if you guys stayed behind, and really we'd love to share, to hear what God, where God may, some of your, maybe your rock bottom stories. If you want to ask Stephen some questions, Stephen, we're so grateful that you were able to share with us this beautiful life of redemption, this story of redemption, that God can take anybody, even
Amen.
at our lowest, and use that for His glory. God, we thank you so much for loving us despite us. It's not some future clean version of ourselves that you died for, but it's at our worst where you reached out across the chasm and called us by name and washed off the dirt, the grime, and now we stand spotless before a God that cannot stand sin. And we can confidently stand before you in that manner because of Christ. Thank you for Stephen and his powerful testimony. We ask that you continue using him. I pray that his story, you will use his story to speak to all of us, to speak to our hearts. And not only that, but that it will stir our affection towards you, that it will encourage us to share our hero's journey, and that you allow us to be bold men of action. We love you, and it's in the name of your son, Jesus, that we ask all these things. Amen.
Thanks for joining and listening. We hope that you were truly blessed. Now, you can join the live call every Friday morning at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time, and please bring a friend. And to learn more about the MLC, visit our website at themlc.life. That's themlc.life. Have a great day.